We all want to know who's going to be the next starting quarterback for the Miami Hurricanes. Here's why the next 15 days are going to be decisive.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
I am Alex Dono, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC and writer for Canes County at Rivals. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose. That's FanDuel.com to get started. On this loaded episode of Locked On Canes, we'll talk about the retirement of the truth teller and how we can try to talk him out of it. We're going to talk about the qualities Miami needs to look for in their next defensive coordinator. Yeah, that job is still open. We'll be answering questions on this episode from our Locked On Canes insiders. If you'd like to become an insider, you can try it free for 14 days. Click the link in the show description below. Get text messages directly from mine to yours. Let's talk about Miami's quarterback situation because there are a couple of important dates coming up, okay? And I will explain why within the next 15 days, by January 24th at the absolute latest, we're going to know whether the next starting quarterback at the U is going to be someone Miami brings in potentially from the transfer portal from someplace else. A couple of big names that we've been following. You know, we'll see what happens with Quinn Ewers at Texas. His team is currently still involved in the college football playoff semifinal game coming up. They still have a chance to win a championship. Could Miami make a move on someone like Ewers? Could Miami still make a move on Carson Beck of Georgia? You know, he is injured right now. Georgia has been eliminated. Now, I know that in the case of Carson Beck, he is already technically, unofficially declared for the 2025 NFL draft. However, we have not reached the drop dead date when that becomes official yet. January 15th is the drop dead date for him. There's a different drop dead date for Beck versus quarterbacks who are still involved in the college football playoff. And of course, we all remember unofficially around the new year last year, Cam Ward declared for the NFL draft, but before the drop dead date of January 15th, I think it was January 13th or 14th, was when he decided and announced instead of declaring for the draft, he was going to play one more year in college at the University of Miami. So the drop dead date for Carson Beck at Georgia, who has been, in some reports and rumors linked to Miami. Of course, Beck, well publicized. He's dating Hannah Cavender of the Miami women's basketball team. He has some familiarity with the area, the campus. Miami wants to make a move at quarterback. His final date to decide if he's going pro for sure or not is January 15th. Now, another name that's been, linked, maybe a player Miami might take a shot at. There's a lot of ifs here. Quinn Ewers with the Texas Longhorns. Texas, of course, still involved in the college football playoff. And so if Texas were to, say, get to the championship game on January 20th, the drop dead date for quarterbacks who make it to the championship game would be January 24th. So the hard deadline for players who teams are already done, been eliminated from the postseason or played their bowl games already, January 15th. Now, in the case of Quinn Ewers, that could extend all the way until January 24th. Championship game participants have until the 24th of January to declare their draft eligibility, allowing NFL teams to have a list of full list of names by January 25th. So by January 24th at the very latest, that's when we're going to know, is Miami's next quarterback going to be someone you bring in from someplace else, a proven, experienced commodity, or are we going to have that battle royale of the young guys who are currently on the roster throughout spring football into fall camp? Emory Williams entering his third year at the U, Judd Anderson heading into his second year, or could it be the freshman stud coming in off of two consecutive state championships, Luke Nickel, coming in as a true freshman. We get this question from our guy Quan McCain, who says, if available, would you prefer Jalen Milroe, who, by the way, I think Milroe is probably going to follow through on going pro, but we'll see. Stranger things have happened. A lot of people thought that Cam Ward would a year ago. Would you prefer, he asked, Jalen Milroe, Quinn Ewers, or Carson Beck for the 2025 season? Okay, so in the case of, and I'm going to nitpick, okay, because I think any of these guys would be more, let's say, more reliable options than what we know we already have. Because again, we all know, Emory Williams got an opportunity to play half of the game in the Pop-Tarts Bowl and did not perform well. That was not a good audition for him, and he lacks the on-field experience. Now, in the case of Carson Beck, he's got overall limitations. Not to mention, he's coming off of a UCL surgery, Tommy John surgery. Now, even if most of the estimates, people seem to think he would definitely be, ready for the start of a football season, for the start of fall camp and all that, would probably be at the very best, very limited throughout spring. And so you wouldn't have that, have the full opportunity to play through spring football, which I think is important for quarterbacks. I mean, that was important for Cam Ward last year. I mean, he was in Miami in January, full health, no limitations, full go for workouts, spring football, all that. So I think there are concerns about that with Carson Beck, about him recovering from surgery. In the case of Jalen Milroe, he's got, the highest athletic upside out of those three, does have some limitations as a passer, really strong arm, but doesn't always, reliably make all the throws you want him to make. Now, in the case of Quinn Ewers, I think this could be a Goldilocks situation where that's the one that's probably just right. I think Ewers would be the guy who, obviously does not have the athletic upside of Jalen Milroe, but doesn't have some of the other downsides that come with Carson Beck. Ewers comes off outside of going up against Georgia twice where he didn't look great, Ewers comes off a really good season at Texas, maybe a couple too many interceptions, but 29 touchdown passes to 11 interceptions, completed about 66% of his passes this year. He's got all the experience in the world. So I think if Miami is able to go after someone like Ewers, there's a ton of upside there. Now, if you're going to go after any of these options, it would be expensive from an NIL point of view. Now, I do believe Miami has shown, if they really did, make a bid for John Mateer, which we believe that they did. I can't 100% confirm that, but we believe Miami took a shot at Mateer from Washington State, who ultimately went to Oklahoma. I think they have the money to spend from an NIL point of view. They're just kind of waiting for the right guy to spend it on. So I do believe Miami could be competitive in a potential bidding war for Quinn Ewers. It was reported within the last week or two that, unnamed schools are making bids as high as $6 million for one season with Ewers. That seems like crazy money. But I do think, if Miami does identify that a guy like that is a guy they need, and I think he checks off probably more boxes, than Jalen Milroe or Carson Beck would, that I believe the juice would be worth the squeeze there up to a certain point. Okay. But then I know that you're going to ask a bunch of follow-up questions on this. Like, wait, Ewers could very well decide to go pro, right? That his draft stock would be pretty high, especially if he wins a national championship, and I would assume him playing well would be a big part of that, then his stock can only go up from here on out. So I don't know, maybe if you're thinking Miami has a shot at Ewers, you're probably rooting against him, in the national semifinals, hoping maybe they get eliminated and don't reach the championship game. And then, the other part of it is, well, could he decide to go pro? He absolutely could decide to go pro. Could he decide to stay at Texas? I don't know if that's his decision to make. In the case of the Longhorns, I think it's pretty well publicized that they're probably ready to nudge him out because they have Arch Manning. He's going to be heading into his third year. They don't want Arch with all the investment that they've made in him, and Arch wants to play. Like Texas can't have him sitting on the bench for a third year. Otherwise they might lose Arch, right? Maybe Arch could be a Miami Hurricane if Quinn Ewers came back to, but no, I think the Ewers era in Texas is going to be over. The question is, does he play somewhere else in college next year, or does he go to the NFL? So what's Ewers draft stock going to look like? This day and age, right, where quarterbacks in college can make seven-figure NIL deals. If you're not given a first round or a second round grade, it can definitely be beneficial to play one more season in college and try to get your draft stock up to the first round while making a lot of money in the process. That just worked for Cam Ward, who gambled on himself, was getting, about a fourth round draft grade a year ago and is likely now to be the number one overall pick, made a lot of money allegedly at Miami during this season and raised his draft stock in the process. So here's what was recently said about the Quinn Ewers draft stock by NFL insider Field Yates, who was on an ESPN podcast this week. He said, quote, "My view of Quinn Ewers right now is not a first-round pick," Yates said. And Field Yates has worked for the Kansas City Chiefs front office, New England Patriots scouting department and front office. He continued, "I'm not sure he's a second-round pick either, based on some of the things I've seen this season, even with some of the good that we saw in the Peach Bowl." He says, if you're a player that might be on the fringe of being a second or third round pick, and there's an opportunity to play for a handful of $1 million for an extra year of college football, which is what the landscape is for the highest profile quarterbacks, that maybe you do that. So again, for Quinn Ewers, his drop dead date to declare could be anywhere up to the 24th of January. For Carson Beck, January 15th. So we're going to have a really good idea within the next 15 days whether Miami's next starting quarterback is somebody from someplace else, or if you ride with what you have in the room and let them compete. Now, there are other factors out there because, there's another transfer portal window that's going to open in April. I don't recall or know of, in any of the previous years of the portal, a big time quarterback becoming available in the spring window. I don't think there's any precedent for that. You're a lot more likely to get your guy in December or January than you are in April. So I can't think of any examples of quarterbacks moving that late. There are reasons why, as a quarterback, it's better to play spring football at the place you're gonna play the following year. That's one thing to think. Oh, I guess Jakari. Not that this was a big time guy, but Jakari Brown did make the move from Miami to UCF in the spring last year, if I'm thinking out loud. So I guess it has happened before. Maybe not at the levels of a Quinn Ewers or a Carson Beck. That's one thing. And the other thing is, graduate transfers can make the move just about any time. So if there are any grad transfer quarterbacks out there who are not thinking of entering the NFL draft, they could enter at a different time. I don't necessarily know of any tremendous grad transfers who are available right now, but I have a feeling we're going to know by January 24th at the absolute latest if Miami's getting a big time guy like a Quinn Ewers or Carson Beck, or if we're going to roll with what we got. We'll answer more of you guys' questions, including a lot of questions about the defensive coordinator search. So here's what you want to do. You want to keep it locked right here. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. I'm only getting started with Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money, great app, help you find any subscriptions you forgot about, or maybe you were paying for them twice? It's happened to me. I had a few subscriptions I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place: subscriptions, your spending habits, even goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. Best feature for me is that subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services I wasn't using anymore. I've already saved a ton. Plus, with that goals feature, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my family's future. No more stressing about budgeting every month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Thank you for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We get a question from Bucks Canes in Evans, Georgia. We got a lot of Canes fans in Georgia. Thank you so much for being with us. Now that the 2024 season is over, and we're all doing retrospectives on it. He says, as I think back to the beginning of the year and going into the season, we all knew that the secondary was going to be the biggest question mark and liability going into the season. And with that, we expected the strength of our defense to be the defensive line. As it turns out, the defensive line underperformed. He said, given that, is it fair to question, or is it blasphemous to question, how much the defensive line underperformance was due to coaching Jason Taylor versus Lance Guidry's scheme? He says, I know Jason Taylor is a Hall of Famer and everything else, but when you think about it from a college football coaching perspective, last season was actually his first season as a position coach. Before that, he was an analyst, and before that, he was at the high school level. So I think it's only fair and just that we also look at that too when passing out defensive underperformance grades despite his NFL accolades. Well, okay, first things first. I think based on Mario Cristobal's actions, I would say that he probably believes the pass rush, and we can agree the pass rush underperformed. It was dominant in spots, but it was not dominant consistently. And, they probably left the questionable secondary out to dry too much. But based on who has been fired and who has not been fired, it's safe to say Mario Cristobal probably feels that the scheme was more to blame than the techniques. And, in the case of Jason Taylor, and, obviously I'm not a former Division I or NFL defensive lineman like JT is, but based on the feedback that I hear from guys that he has coached and guys that he has worked with, players do feel like they learn a lot of positive technique from him. So if I just go based on the evidence, I'm going to say that it probably had more to do with the scheme than Jason Taylor's techniques. However, I respect your right and all of our rights to question everything, right? Because that's, we don't want to automatically give anyone a free pass. But in the case of Jason Taylor, and obviously this doesn't really have anything to do with the coaching necessarily, but Jason Taylor is an excellent recruiter, as we know. I mean, reading the stories and hearing the stories of what Hayden Lowe had to say, who flipped from USC to Miami, about how he only heard from the USC defensive line coach. He only called him twice. He called him when he committed. He called him when he decommitted. Whereas Jason Taylor and, Joe Salavea and Miami's coaches were in constant contact. I mean, that's, there have been a lot of reflections on Jason Taylor's work. Am I saying Jason Taylor is perfect? No, I don't think anyone's perfect as a coach. He was nearly perfect as a player. But I would say based on the feedback we get and the changes that have been made to the defensive staff and the idea that Cristobal seems to really want to keep Jason Taylor, no matter who the next defensive coordinator is, it appears as though the scheme was the bigger issue than the techniques of the defensive line. But I appreciate your question. We get this one from Sammy. What are your thoughts on Mike Rumph getting back to the role of cornerbacks coach, or DeMarcus Van Dyke coming back to be the cornerbacks coach? He says, I feel our recruiting in that area with DVD was great. And with Rumph, we had cornerbacks that got developed. Well, first of all, I would be open to either or any of those options, right? Now, in the case, I don't know what's going to happen with Chavis Jackson, who currently coaches the cornerbacks. Obviously, it's worth noting that he's someone who had worked with Lance Guidry at Guidry's previous stop at Marshall, and Guidry was the one who hired him. So, does that say something about whether Coach Jackson is going to be back next year or not? Obviously, he's still with the staff as of right now, but you read between the lines, you could definitely see maybe a job coming open at cornerbacks coach. Maybe Rumph, who's with the organization now, that could be an internal option. With DeMarcus Van Dyke, I think at some point he would love to come home. It seems like he's on a roll right now at USF, and he's kind of building his resume. So I don't know. I don't know if he would be an option to come back right now, but it's definitely something to look at. And I would be open to those options. We get this one. Dono, do you think we miss out on many of these portal players because of being frugal with money, or the school, or because maybe of Mario? He says, watching Florida State pick up so many players after I'll have to censor this one, after an S season makes me wonder. I understand they need more players and the coaches affect that too. When you look at the transfer portal approaches, you alluded to this a little bit. You can't you can't really compare what Miami is trying to do with what Florida State is trying to do. Florida State has already brought in more than 20 transfers, but I mean, when you go 2-10, like, you need to overhaul just about everything, right? And Mike Norvell in the previous few seasons, he's shown is very aggressive in the transfer portal. That's his bread and butter, right? Mario's bread and butter is usually the high school stuff, although Mario does use the portal, of course. But Mike Norvell's bread and butter is the transfer portal. And when you go 2-10, you need to make radical changes. Like Miami, who's brought in 7 transfers so far and have the highest average of the quality of players that they're bringing in. Most of them on the defensive side of the ball. Miami's looking more for quality, where Florida State, I'm not saying they're not looking for quality. They obviously have to, but they're looking for quality and quantity. As far as the money thing goes, I think something that's happening right now with this kind of crescendo of the NIL era is some of these bidding wars are getting so crazy. I think Miami understands, like, you have to pick your spots with certain players, and that if you overpay for everybody, then it sets a weird precedent for the rest of your roster, because the guys who currently play for you are going to be like, hey, how come that guy who you just brought in is making more NIL money than me? I also think that in my humble opinion, and the educated guess that I'm making here, is I think Miami is trying to save a big wad of cash for a potential quarterback transfer. So obviously money comes into play there, but Miami doesn't need to bring in as many players as a team that went 2-10 last year. Speaking of Florida State, who, by the way, credit to Florida State, they crushed Miami in basketball last night. Hurricanes basketball has been really tough to watch so far this season. I was hoping, we had a lot of fun. People ask, why don't you cover basketball very much on Locked On Canes? I mean, is that what you want right now? Yeah, we covered them a lot when they were in the Final Four a couple of years ago. Somebody says, hey, how does Leonard Hamilton recruit better than us? Well, I mean, listen, Leonard Hamilton's been around. He was a Miami coach, 2+ decades ago. Hamilton's been around a long time. But also, let's remember, Leonard Hamilton is currently getting sued by 7 former Florida State players for making NIL promises that he did not keep. So maybe making big promises is part of why he recruits so well. But there's no question Canes basketball is they're in the mud right now. And Jim Larinaga did a lot of good things here. He stepped aside. Bill Courtney is in a really tough spot right now as the interim coach. I want to make the right hire and get the basketball program back on the map, because we're 2 years removed from a Final Four appearance. All right, we'll talk more about the defensive coordinator stuff. You guys have questions about players. You want to keep it locked right here, my friends. We're not done yet on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Thank you for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. For your next listen, make sure you check out Locked On ACC. Kenton Gibbs and I from Locked On Wolfpack, we talk everything ACC football and basketball. We talked about the reports that NFL teams are trying to get Bill Belichick, who just signed his contract at North Carolina. They're already trying to get him to change his mind and come back to the NFL. There's so much to talk about these days on Locked On ACC, available free wherever you get your podcasts, and available free on YouTube. We get this question from our guy, BP. And by the way, BP, it was great finally meeting you in person at the Pop-Tarts Bowl, and I met a handful of you Locked On Canes insiders and listeners at the Pop-Tarts Bowl. I appreciate you guys so much. He says, hey, question for the pod. What is it going to take to get Bruce Warner to unretire? I got to tell you, well, first things first. I've been talking a lot with Bruce since he announced his retirement from doing shows yesterday. He is so appreciative of the love that he's getting from you guys, because we got a lot of nice comments about how much, most of you love the truth teller, and even those who don't love him, like you appreciate him and you appreciate his honesty and everything, and how he tells his truth. So he's getting a lot of love, and maybe we can sweet talk him into coming out of retirement. I think the other possibility would be if Miami were to make a huge splash at quarterback, if they go out and sign a Quinn Ewers, or if, Miami gets a a tremendous defensive coordinator. I know Bruce Warner is a huge fan of Will Muschamp. So if Mario, if you're watching this, if you go out and hire Muschamp, truth teller might just come back to us. But we're actually, like, in all seriousness, even though, like, he's he's got a lot going on in his life and with his health, like, he doesn't want to do the regular weekly thing. I know he is open to doing, like, maybe a more monthly type of thing. So we have not seen or heard the last of the truth teller. I can tell you that. And maybe we can sweet talk him out of retirement. We'll try to do that. Let's see. We got this question from Vic in North Miami Beach, who says, "Hey, Dono, are folks being too critical of Emory Williams? Outside of the bowl game appearance, he's looked solid, and we're looking at other quarterbacks that in this season have also had multiple bad appearances. I get you want competition, but it seems that this year's crop of quarterbacks in the portal are not as good as last year, and I'm not sure why they would be worth the money. I prefer surrounding Emory with more talent and letting him improve through the spring and the summer." Yeah, I mean, Vic, bottom line, you guys know that I really like Emory Williams, but his performance in the Pop-Tarts Bowl I thought was alarming. Okay. And while I will agree with you that a lot of the other quarterbacks who have been in the transfer portal may not be worth seven figures, I think there's a reason why Miami hasn't gone after a lot of these guys. So when we have conversations about bringing in a quarterback, there's a reason why we talk about people like Carson, Beck, or Quinn Ewers, or John Mateer, who Miami already missed on, of course, but why we're talking about guys like that who are clear, experience, proven options, right? And listen, if there is an opportunity for Emory Williams to change his narrative, I would root for him to do that. I would, because again, he is tremendously intelligent, strong-minded quarterback. I think he has obviously limitations with his athleticism, but he has practiced well. So if he can find more consistency and instill more confidence, I would definitely root for him, because again, you'd be hard pressed to find a better human being on that football team than Emory Williams. He's a tremendous young man. We get this one from Tampa Lou, who says, "Hey, how hard would it be getting a defensive coordinator with Mario wanting to keep his guys on the defensive side, like, Jason Taylor, et cetera?" First of all, like, I don't know exactly what Mario wants to do there. I think a lot of us, we read between the lines and we make our own projections about how, hey, like, we think they would want to keep Jason Taylor around no matter who the next DC is. And I would also say a lot of prospective defensive coordinators out there would probably want to work with Jason Taylor. Again, tremendous recruiter. And I know he's relatively unproven, I guess, as a college position coach, but you hear good feedback about the work that he does with players. So, if Jason Taylor would be a deal breaker for your next defensive coordinator, I would find that hard to believe. But again, this is like, I can't speak for Mario. Like, we're only projecting that, hey, certain members of the defensive staff like Jason Taylor and Derek Nicholson are people we think he would probably like to keep, but I don't know for sure. If Mario feels like the best possible defensive coordinator hire, if he wants to bring in all of his own people, I can't say for sure if that would be a deal breaker. All right, let me think. We get this one from D French, who says, "Hey, what qualities does Miami's new defensive coordinator need to have? What position would you like to see him coach? Out of the names we've heard, who is your favorite?" So to me, I think the most important qualities, experience as a longtime defensive play caller, I think would be great, or as a former head coach, because I believe it would be beneficial to Mario Cristobal to really have a head coach for that side of the football, right? I mean, and listen, Lance Guidry, obviously, before he got here, did some really good things at Marshall and Western Kentucky, but, didn't have that long track record at major programs, had never been a head coach before. So I think there's a reason why I really like Pat Fitzgerald, the former Northwestern head coach, longtime head coach who can kind of give you authority on that side of the football. I'm obviously, I don't know how realistic, we throw out the name Will Muschamp a lot. I don't know if he's even a realistic candidate or not, but someone who fits that profile of, a longtime coach on the defensive side of the football, and preferably a head coach, someone to give that sort of experience and that authority to that side of the football. So those are qualities that I look for personally. Let's see. Kane's comeback tour says, how much do you look forward to our next two quarterbacks that are coming out of high school, 2025 and 2026? I think they're going to be very good. Yeah, I mean, if you guys missed the episode, we had Balin Trujillo on yesterday, who's the private quarterbacks coach for Darion Coleman, who's committed to Miami for 2026. We've had Luke Nickel on this show many times, who's coming in 2025. I'm super excited, and I think I give a lot of credit to Shannon Dawson, who's not only the offensive coordinator but the quarterback's coach. He recruits that position. I think Dawson has found Miami a couple of gems for the future, and hopefully he can change the narrative of mediocre to bad quarterback recruiting at Miami, that we haven't had the most success recruiting that position out of high school. I think Dawson is changing that narrative, and by the time Darion Coleman gets to campus 2026, I mean, who knows? If we have a one-year bridge guy next year, he and Luke and Judd could be competing for that starting job. So I am super excited for the future of that position. As always, hold on. I want to answer one more question, because our hermano from another madre, Gilbertito, asked a couple of questions. I want to make sure to answer at least one of these. He says, which non-conference game next season will be the toughest test for the Canes? The Gators in week 1 the Gators in week 3, or the Notre Dame Fighting Irish in week 1? I know Gator fans love to hate watch this show, right? Because I guess their own content creators, outside of my guy Brandon from Locked On Gators, who we love, there's not a whole lot of good content that comes out of the Gator side. So I know the Gator fans are watching, but listen, man, I mean, obviously the Gators will be a tough opponent, but Notre Dame, I mean, no, first game of the season, Miami is going to be breaking in a new quarterback, whether it's somebody who's already on the roster or somebody who's not on the roster. First game of the season for a new quarterback against one of the most ferocious defenses in the country, a team that might win a national championship. I mean, Notre Dame is in the Final Four. They've got an opportunity. No disrespect intended. Well, a little bit of disrespect intended to Florida, but I mean, Notre Dame is the tougher game. Florida will still be tough. I mean, obviously, there's a scenario where Miami loses both of those games, right? If the Hurricanes end up finding the right quarterback and the right defensive coordinator, maybe we win both of those games, right? A lot of people prior to the season starting this year thought, hey, Florida in the swamp, that's probably a loss. Before we knew about Florida State, how bad they were going to be. Florida State's probably a loss. Miami wins both of them. Like, you never know. It's hard to project that, what's going to happen in September. It's hard to project that in January. But, Notre Dame, that's the tougher game. No question about it. Thank you guys so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. Make sure to smash that thumbs up button, smash the like button, and subscribe. Make sure you subscribe on all the platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your audio pods. The audio pod is great. You don't have to look at my face. I mean, my wife tells me she wants to look at my face a little bit less. Maybe you guys feel the same way. You can listen to the audio version wherever you go. We'll talk to you guys next time. My wife doesn't really say that, by the way. Honey, if you're watching this, I know you love this beautiful face of mine. We'll talk to you guys again next time on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.